to make a long story short, I won. It was a unanimous decision. It was a very intense oral argument. I'll never forget it. Honestly, it was one of the highlights of my whole life. It was three judges, one white, one black, one Filipino woman. And that woman is now the Supreme Court Justice of California. Kentil something, I can't remember her name. And she was very supportive and extremely intelligent. And in fact, she ran the domestic violence program for the courts. So she knew a lot about domestic violence. And she asked extremely good questions. But ultimately, they held, all three of them, that not only does this violate equal protection, but that the language of the decision says there's a significant enough number of male victims. They didn't want to actually give the stats because it's controversial. But they said there's a significant enough number of male victims that it violates equal protection to exclude them. And in fact, that this kind of language carries with it the baggage of sexual stereotypes. That's the language that they used. And they said in there, which is what I argued, that if you can't mix the genders in a shelter, let's say it's too small, as opposed to being like a YWCA-style dormitory place where there's a shared bathroom or something. If it's too small, they can at least give out a hotel voucher. It may not be as good, but for some people it might even be better. They're alone. They may not have the anonymity. It may be easier to find them, things like that. They may not have in-house counseling, available services like that. But it's still something at minimum. And that was the decision that they made. And the news went all the way to Scotland. I was getting calls from Scotland from a reporter telling me, we're having the same problem out here. And this is the citation, in case anyone wants to use it. You can always just search Wood v. Horton. But what I found after researching this is that the only decision like this in the whole country, and maybe even the whole world, I haven't found one anywhere. A few years after this, there was a decision like it in West Virginia at the lower level, and it got overturned on appeal because of jurisdictional issues, not even on the substance. So as far as I know, this is it. And I was hoping that maybe there'd be other lawsuits throughout the nation. And maybe there will be. But so far, I don't know of any yet. I know that there's activism for male victims all over the country. In fact, all over the world. In the Philippines, they just got a group of male victims just got their local government to pay attention to men. There are government-funded shelters for male victims in Amsterdam. And I think even in Morocco or Bosnia. There are also non-government funded, privately funded shelters for men. There's in fact one all the way up in Wairika in California, from what I heard. But we need more. Yeah?
Mark, why is it that, my name is Robert Brown and I work for First to Serve. I also facilitate domestic violence. In women's shelters, in safe houses, why is it that if there's a young boy in the family, they take women and children, if he's 12 years old,
yeah,
they won't take him?
Right.
Why is that?
Well, what they would say, from what I've heard, is that, as he becomes older, he becomes a man and he can be intimidating to victims. That's what the argument is, from what I understand. And that not just intimidation, but as he becomes sexual, maybe he might hit on them or something. Those kind of issues, from what I've heard. I don't really buy that personally. I find that also to be discriminatory. And if I had a woman, in fact, I have known a woman who were denied services because their child was 13 or 14, right. That's a lawsuit that I would do, but I just haven't had anyone like that come forward and say, I want to sue. But I do think something like that is an interesting one. Another area that's interesting is is transsexuals. And I talked about this when I argued at the appellate court, that, what the whole thing with transgendered people is going to really throw a curve into all this too, and it is. They're it changes their intake system. They have to start asking specific questions, but after a while, as the gender lines mulch, the whole discriminatory policies have to kind of erode somewhat. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Thanks for asking it. I don't like that policy at all, but yeah. So if you know anyone who wants to challenge that, let me know. But, I mean, I'm pretty busy, but something like that I might be able to do. Yeah.
Mark, I'm just wondering, since you've won this, have you seen, how well have they implemented it in terms
Yeah.
of policy down at the, county levels?
Right. I've heard of some changes, but I do not, from what I've seen, it's not, like we would want it. What happened is after this decision came out, we had a meeting. The LA County Board of Supervisors gave us a meeting with the shelter people, with the DA, with the public defender, and all those county people. We had a big table, and we all talked about a number of points we can agree on, because the way they were arguing that they're interpreting that is that as long as they refer the male victims to Valley Oasis, they've complied with Woods. That's what they're saying in LA County. That doesn't mean there weren't any changes in LA County, but they were kind of voluntary changes. The ones who aren't helping at all, they are referring to Valley Oasis. Well, that's a change, because in 2000, many of them weren't. But I don't agree that that's complying with Woods. Imagine race discrimination and saying, well, we complied, we sent them over there. It's, I think there needs to be more than that. You can at minimum provide at least the same counseling and legal services you give to women. And you probably can provide a certain number of vouchers per month. They get hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. There's more that can be done than just sending them to another place, especially a place way out in the desert that's over an hour away, which is difficult for a lot of people, especially with kids. So what's happening is, and I am going to talk about that. Let me see what happened. This is just some of the media coverage, even Spanish-speaking media. But what I wanted to talk about is what's going on now. Thanks for asking. Yeah. After a few years, what we did, and I wasn't involved because my lawsuits make me kind of the boogeyman at the Domestic Violence Council. They become afraid of what they're going to say. They think I'm going to sue them. But I don't know if any of you heard Stanley Green speak. He spoke earlier. He was a victim in L.A. In fact, his wife, he's a very small, frail man for those of you who saw him. And his wife was very big. And she took him in the car once and shoved her knee into his ribcage and actually moved it a few centimeters. And it really damaged him badly. And he couldn't get any help either. And this was long ago. This was, I think, in the 80s or something like that. Well, he has been working with the LA Domestic Violence Council and created a male victims task force. And a task force is the smallest level of, there's a task force, there's a committee, and there's a commission, things like that. Well, the task force is temporary. It's supposed to last 1 year or so, and you have to, if you can prove that you've done some major good things, then you can become a committee with approval. So he's been working with the commission ever since this decision, and he gained some allies in the DA's office and a few others, and he successfully got a task force for male victims approved, but not without opposition. And there are still, now Patricia Overberg is gone now, but the new director is named Carol Ensign. And she's still on our side, but not quite as adamant as Patricia. She didn't really think a lawsuit's the way to do it. So she's been working with him, and they did create a task force, and it is constantly under threat of being killed. Constantly. They've done some great things. They held a workshop, and a lot of people showed up. They've done amazing things. But there are certain people in LA County who want it killed. And they do little things all the time to sabotage it. All the time. And in fact, right now, it got so bad that Stanley could barely handle it. In fact, he's the kind of guy who had to take assertiveness classes after he was victimized. And so he often would go there, and he just couldn't handle it. And so it's changing hands now, and there's a big question as to whether it's going to survive. If any of you have any interest in being involved in something like that, please let me know. And if you forget how to reach me, look up National Coalition for Men, contact them. You'll always reach me that way. Yeah.
I work with Children's Hospital Los Angeles, the LA Fathers Program.
Uh-huh.
Partnered with Peace Over Violence.
Yeah.
For our domestic violence, our fathers who either been perpetrators or victims.
Yeah.
So within that, it's been really difficult. Like the whole social stigma of actually coming forth, even with our counseling sessions, and saying that that I've been a victim of it. And even if they do identify that I've been a victim of it, they don't want to proceed with anything. They don't want to
Really? Yeah.
nothing. I know you're coming from a legal standpoint. As a service provider, how do you know what organizations, like Peace Over Violence, they've helped tremendously providing education. It's just getting them to actually say, I need services, I need to get out.
Yeah.
Or actually saying, oh no, it's fine. She just does it every once in a while.
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
But, it's those type of situations where it's just very significant. You're trying to get them to identify, this is a problem that you need to take care of, and you're saying, no.
Yeah. Are you asking me what kind of groups you could join with, or what kind of things you could do to raise awareness? Do you have a card?
I do.
Because if you have a card, I'd like to connect you to Stanley, who's very connected with the groups in LA. But one other thing that I'd encourage you to do, if you have a very credible group like Peace Over Violence, you might do a PSA.
Okay.
Maybe you guys have already roundtabled this stuff and are way ahead of me on that. But that's one thing that I've often thought could be useful. A PSA is one thing. Another thing would be to try to work with the LA County supervisors or the city of LA. In Glendale, they were doing this thing where they were providing, the Glendale City Council was providing free self-defense classes, but only for women. Well, the National Coalition for Men wrote a letter to the city council about that, asking, would you provide one for men? And their first reaction of the city council member was very negative. It was amazing. They just thought it was a big joke. But their attorneys advised them, you need to, this could violate the California Unruh Act. So they did very reluctantly, but they said, if no one shows up, we don't have to keep doing it. Well, like 20-something guys showed up, and I was there too. And the Glendale News Press supported us and really kind of chastised the city council for their attitude about it. That's one kind of thing you might do, But I would please give me your card, because I mean it. I really would like to connect you with Stanley. Yeah.
So how do you go about getting the media on your side?
It depends a lot on the person who's doing it and who they're, who's in charge, who's above them, who their producers are and all that. It really does. But one thing that really makes a difference is when you have a sympathetic victim. When you have someone who's just a tester, both the media and the courts and the public don't really think a lot of it, unless it's something that they're already sympathetic about, this is not something that they are. So you having a male victim who really has a story, especially if they've got kids, is something that can be very effective with the media. That's one thing. And I think that's the best way, honestly. Other than that, it's a matter of luck. He was next, but was that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on to her.
Okay, yeah.
Or at least
Yeah.
her reply. So one of the things, I also belong to the National Coalition for Men. I'm the chapter president out in North Carolina. And one of the things that we've found to be very effective to get certain stories in the media is to actually research the media. And again, now if you're trying to get it locally, that's one type of media coverage. Obviously, statewide is another type, and in our case, we try to get things covered nationally, even though it may be the particular situation, maybe in our home state, but the ramifications of it are a national issue. And so what we've done is we have actually tracked newspaper stories that are favorable to our position.
Yeah.
And we have then started contacting those journalists. And we have we, along with our coalition members, have formed a relationship with
Yeah.
journalists.
That
who are
matters
now-
too, yeah.
Who are now on a regular basis. My particular issue is men falsely, college students falsely accused of sexual assault.
Yeah.
And so now we have probably, I would say we probably have 18 to 20 journalists nationwide that are writing stories covering our end of the issue, because
Right.
it's overwhelmingly not covered. It's,
Right.
there's an allegation of a sexual assault, the man's automatically a rapist. And, we tend to say, wait a second, let's let due process run its course before you start labeling someone a rapist.
Right. I fully agree. I've built relationships with reporters and journalists, and you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, I'm
No, I
sorry.
was going to say, there's an organization under the umbrella of Children's Institute called Project Fatherhood, and they deal with a lot of issues with men and their children.
Really? Yeah.
And in Project Fatherhood, I'm a Project Fatherhood facilitator. There's a lot of men in Project Fatherhood who are victims.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah, it's Alan Michael Graves is the executive director.
Thank you. Could you write that down? I mean, I'll remember Project Fatherhood. I have heard of it, but I don't know anything about it.
It's a great program. I just started a version of it for First to Serve on this past Monday.
Yeah. They operate in LA?
Yeah, in LA, all over LA County.
Really?
Yes.
See, that's something that that could be a really good resource, something like that, That's just it, is you have to be careful, I wanted to show you one thing. Remember I said about Weave, how we sued them long ago and how they changed? Well, I think, where is it? Thought I had saved it. I wanted to show you that news story. Well, I guess it didn't save. I had saved the news story. Maybe I just need to back up about it. That really showed some amazing coverage that I didn't even know about that was going on. There it is. So you can see there's a huge difference. That's 2010. Our lawsuit was in 2005 and we won in 2008. Thank you. That was an enormous difference. And I mean, I'll still take questions, but the one thing I really want to pound home is just, this is much bigger than just the victims themselves. As we talked about, as we all know, when you exclude a certain number of victims because of their gender, either from your outreach or your services, you're encouraging the cycle of domestic violence. Because when children are seeing it, that cycle just continues. And that's the problem that got to me, was this was much, much bigger than just what was happening to my friend and his kids. So there's still a lot to do. And the Woods case was not the end of it by any means. Thank you all. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to talk to you about anything. Thank you.